Great, thank you all. So that brings us on to our next keynote session. So I will really briefly introduce our moderator. Dr. Christine Lemaitre is a pioneer of sustainable building. As CEO of the DGNB, German Sustainable Building Council, Christine has set the course for better planning and building culture in Germany for almost a decade. She has been a member in the board of directors for the World Green Building Council between 2016 and 2020, and had the chair of the Europe Regional Network. She's a co-initiator of the global initiative Building Sense Now and received the Eco Innovator Award from Global Green Economies, the Global Green Economic Forum in 2019. With that, welcome Christine, and I'll let you introduce the rest of the speakers.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. Very happy and excited to join this great event. I'm really looking forward to our three panelists, which I will introduce, I think, one by one, and then let them give their short intro. And then in the end, we hopefully have time for some question. The first panelist is Carl Bäckstrand from White Arkitekter. I think everyone knows White Arkitekter. Carl is partner and deputy CEO of White Arkitekter. White Arkitekter has a very strong focus on sustainable urban design and have already implemented many successful projects in Sweden, but as well internationally. The second panelist is Mario Cucinella from Mario Cucinella Architects, with offices, it's an architectural firm with offices in Bologna, Milan, and New York. And Mario has additionally been very engaged and founded the Building Green Futures, a nonprofit organization promoting sustainable development, and is engaged in many other organizations. And then our third panelist will be Christian Benimana. I hope I said it correctly. If not, you can correct me later, from the MASS Design Group. He's a senior principal and managing director of this group, where they try to really make a difference in the African context. And he's as well currently the chairman of both the educational board of the Rwanda Institute of Architects and the education board of the East African Institute for Architects. Sorry. So I think we have a wide range of expertise from different countries, and I'd like to introduce first now Carl to do his intro or input.
Thank you. So I will share my screen here. Hope it will work here. Do you see my screen? And do you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Good.
Both, yes.
Thank you. So I will run through a few reflections then. And in 2015, I guess we were all very happy. Either we were in Paris or followed these negotiations from a distance. This was also the year then, of course, when the SDGs were presented in New York, and the year after, the new urban agenda was launched in Quito. And as an architect, of course, I'm so happy having these three global agreements next to each other, as my strong belief is that the climate agenda must go hand in hand with the social agenda. And then yesterday, I was listening to the Ursula von der Leyen when she was talking, giving her State of the Union speak in the European Parliament, and then she showed that EU really now is taking the leadership in this, because we need to go to action, of course, from those agreements, and they are then EU is raising their ambitions from 40 to 55% to cut the carbon emissions. But I would say even more encouraged I was when hearing her talking about architecture in the sense that she is saying that this is not just an environmental or economic project. It needs to be a new cultural project for Europe. Every movement has its own look and feel, and we need to give our systematic change its own distinct aesthetic to match style with sustainability. This is why we will set up a new European Bauhaus, a co-creation space where architects, artists, students, engineers, designers work together to make that happen. I think this is a true belief in an interdisciplinary approach, but also setting architecture in the context to make this change, because it's a lot about behavior, we know. In Sweden, I would say so far we have done fairly well. There's a lot more to done. Up until now, we've managed to cut since 1990 with about 30% in emissions, but of course there's a lot more to be done. And in order to manage that, the Swedish government, they launched right after the Paris Agreement, the so-called Fossil-Free Sweden initiative, where they are getting industries together to set up roadmaps to make their industries carbon neutral in 2045. And there's also a new climate law launched in Sweden that is putting pressure on the government to really evaluate all their policies from a climate perspective. So far on the national and European level, but then it's up to us as businesses, I would say, because this is where the actual action will take place. And at White, I'm then representing White here and an architecture firm. Of course, I mean, we have a huge impact in what we deliver in our projects, but it's also what we do in the offices, I would say, and how we encourage all our the people we are in the offices, and also we can use the offices as sort of laboratories in order to develop new ideas into this. And this happens to be then our office in Stockholm, where we already in the late 90s were trying to bring new thinking in energy performance into this building, using at that time new technology with having the seawater to cool and heat the building then. But of course, a lot have happened since then, but it's a way to show that really use the projects as a laboratories to invent new things. But it's also a lot about engaging people and the community, and there I also believe that we as architects has a lot to do, and it's an education for us all and a learning process to understand more what the climate agenda is all about, and how we can change behavior, how we can invent new ways of living, and also new materials, and in many ways. So doing it together is very important. And at White, we have set up a design process in 7 steps, how to work with those issues. And then first of all, define a clear target, plan for people's needs and the sustainable lifestyle, take advantage of what already exists and reuse it, reduce the need of energy and material, choose materials with low climate impact, use renewable energy, and finally, establish the climate budget and follow up through the project. And this with the climate budget, I think, is a crucial thing here. We need to, from the start, have climate on the top of the agenda as parallel with the economy. We have always used to have the economy there, that needs to be there, but we also need to follow up on the climate all through the process of the project. And this is now we have implemented in White, and we have set a tough target for 2030, saying that by 2030 all our projects will be climate neutral. And of course this is a tough target, but I believe in tough targets in order to make a progress. And up until now, we have, of course, started on this, and we are in this learning process. And I will just show a few examples then of what we are up to. And this is a project in Gothenburg for a new cultural house, where we made all the interior up until 92% of the interior out of reused furniture. And this was the client here was the city of Gothenburg, and of course they had a huge warehouse of of furniture that they didn't know what to do with. And of course, it was a great success to bring this into the building. And 92% are reused of the interior, and it cut the cost of 70% compared to if it would have been all with new furniture. This is a way showing how you cut costs and you bring sustainable approach to the project. Another example from Uppsala, just north of Stockholm, where we two existing office buildings from the 70s are being transformed into new premises here. And in this project, from the start, the idea was to pull them down and build new built on this site. However, we managed in a discussion with the client to convince that we should go for a transformation and try to recycle as much of the materials as possible from the existing buildings. And some figures to show the benefit of this is that this cut the carbon emissions compared to new build with 3,800 tons. And we also saved $10 million approximately in cost saving of the project. And one aspect of that is that the construction time is reduced by 2 years compared to demolition and new build. And we all know that time is has a lot effect on the cost. And then, of course, using more wood in the construction. We all know the embodied carbon, how that can make a huge change in the life cycle of the carbon and of the building. And then this is something that we are really trying to discuss and promote a lot with our clients. And here we see a huge shift now that this is becoming much more of a preferred choice. And I'm not saying that everything will be in the wood in the future. That's not possible and maybe not even wanted. And we know that there are new technologies coming with carbon neutral steel production. It's still on the experimental side, but I'm sure things will happen there. Probably the same with cement and concrete. However, the costs will probably be higher on those materials. So then wood is still very interesting to work with. And of course, there are many other good things with bringing more wood into the architecture. And then finally, looking into, this is an outlook of Stockholm, the Royal Seaport. I think we always need to not only look into the buildings itself, it's about the whole environment and the neighborhoods, and we need to have that perspective in mind. So we are not thinking only on each building, it's the whole setup. And I'm sure that when this project started, maybe 15 years ago or something, it was a lot more focused on the new build. In the future, we will look more into the existing buildings and make more comments focus on that. And Stockholm is moving ahead and heading for an exhibition in 2030 that will be very interesting to follow and see how that will progress. And finally, just to say, it's all about people. We must never forget that. And this is what gives us the hope for the future. It's about the next generation and to make a healthy future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carl. Okay, Christian.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. I think a lot of data, the problem, the complexities of what these challenges, I think everybody is well aware of it. I'll try to talk about some of our work, things we've been doing for the past 10 years, and some of the lessons we're learning. And hopefully I would be able to inspire people to understand that this is a challenge that we can realistically take on and emerge winners against the challenge. So we as a firm, we are founded on this mantra that, you know, there's this binarity to architecture where it's either hurting or helping depending on how we engage with it. And I think many on this group are part of this movement of architecture because we believe in that. More specific to the topic we're talking about here today, this is how you could relate to what we're talking about. And the reason why we try to frame some of these like bigger topics into very simple statements that kind of like sobers up to understand what's really at stake is because this is the goal. And I think it has been simply put, we all understand it. The goal is to limit the global warming to a very specific target that everybody understands by a specific date that we understand. And there are 2 steps to do that. So we need to reduce our emissions by half by a certain date, 2030. And then we need to reach net zero by 2050. I think this is very simple, it's very clear. And I guess for us professionals, it forces us to come out of this kind of like hiatus we've been in for the past, I don't even know how many years, where we hid behind kind of like jargon to not really have substantial accountability to what our work does to contribute or to hurt the communities that we serve. So what we've kind of like started doing internally is to try to now, you know, start from the goal and walk backwards and understand what that means. I won't again repeat this. You know, many people have presented it. I'm sure everyone on this call is very, very familiar with these figures. This 40% is entirely our responsibilities, and we need to do something about it. So what does it really take for us to reduce our emissions by 2030? What do we have to do? And the simple answer, if you think about it, is like, we need to go back to passive systems and also address what we're putting into the building, so embodied carbon. So starting with back to passive systems, what does that look like for us? When we designed this project, Butaro Hospital, back in 2008, in an area that did not have electricity, and it was one of the poorest places on the planet, but there was an ambition to design a state-of-the-art hospital. I think the context kind of like took care of the restraining condition that required us to think about passive systems. But in addition to that, it's very mind-boggling that we are celebrating that in today. Like the way we were building thousands and thousands of years ago is New York Times newspaper worthy in this century. So I guess we're not doing something we haven't done before. And like all of these kind of like scientific targets that have been led us to imagine all these complicated air conditioning systems are actually things that we can achieve with like really, really minimum types of intervention that allows us to achieve, again, these scientific targets of like, maximum air changes per hour, or minimum air changes per hour required in a hospital for it to function properly and control infections, but still be able to use passive systems as much as possible. So this is very possible. And then, obviously this hospital needs to be elegant, it needs to function properly, but at the same time, it pushes us architects now to think even further on how these lessons can be enshrined into laws and policies that allow many facilities to begin utilizing this at scale. So this is a project we worked on with the Benimana Ministry of Health. Let's try to understand how hospitals would start taking over these lessons and implement them into like their guidelines, so that even the existing hospitals that go through retrofits and hospitals that needs to be built in the near future do actually prioritize this as a matter of policy and law. This project is going to be completed this month, and it's built with the same principles. This is another hospital building in the south of the country. with similar kind of like DNA that requires it to be as passively ventilated and as passively lit as possible. And this is another case of example built in an environment that is much more hotter and more humid than Rwanda, but still proves that this is still possible, as it's been done like 1,000 years ago in countries like Iran, what was Iran at that time, Persian architecture, that we all know familiar with. So now, how do we reduce the carbon footprint? And for us, that means we need to, to match the carbon footprint with the human handprint. Like if we say the embodied carbon is mostly associated with the materials that goes into what makes our buildings, then we cannot separate the skills that mine, that transform, that transport, and that fixes these materials into the buildings that architecture that we talk about. So what does that look like for us? For us, it's dialed down to the same principles that we've seen in other movements such as slow food or slow fashion. Like it has to be good, that everybody deserves it. It's a matter of social justice. That that architecture has to be good, has to be inspirational, it has to be beautiful, it has to be award-winning. It has to be clean. Obviously, this is the most kind of like talked about when we can quantify the numbers and say this material at the end of the factory fabrication has this rating in terms of like environmental efficiency or embodied carbon. And then most importantly, it has to be fair. And what that means is that we need to look at this process very holistically. We need to understand who mines these materials and where does it come from, how does it get transported to our sites, and who benefits from the entire process. So this good, clean, and fair, we think, is the right approach, the right methodology to allow us to reduce by half that embodied carbon targets that we have. So how does this footprint handprint looks like for us in our own projects? The same project that I was talking about, but our hospital, again, rural, remote areas, has this beautiful volcanic stone because it's in the volcanic region. And, out of that process emerged like really good talent that allowed us that by the time we finished, building Butaro, and we did an audit to see how we're doing, we found out that 10 years ago, we were achieving the goal of our next 10 years. So this is possible even without being intentional, only just focusing on making sure that what we do is good, clean, and fair as a process of architecture to deploy the buildings. So it shouldn't be very difficult to replicate. And having done that, now we've committed, and I urge everyone here who's in private practice, as Carol just said, like it's up to us businesses to figure out how a business model embraces this and figure out how to integrate it into our own practices. We've taken stock of all our projects to try to understand where we are, and we are pleasantly surprised that it was, half of the global average across all our projects, and we earn to continue pushing that bar down as much as we can. Now, that is doable and it's well and fine, but what about reaching net zero? What does that mean and what does that look like? For us, it really boils down to four main points. We need to conserve intact landscapes, we need to restore ecological functions, we need to figure out how to supply foods to us as a society responsibly, and lastly, we need to grow our buildings. And what that looks like for us can best be represented with this project that I'm going to talk about, that is set, again, in my country of origin, Rwanda, where in less than 30 years, we've reduced our natural environment by more than 50% because we were looking for farmland. And the population is expected again to double by 2040. So, we are expecting that in 20 years from now, we're going to require lands that is twice the size of the country to be able to feed ourselves. So how do we figure out how, and our country is not growing. So how do we figure out that challenge? So the best way this could be solved is to go away from this monoculture practice and into like one health approach, where the diversity that we you know, that supports these agricultural systems, but make sure like the ecosystem stays healthy, are protected as we do, you know, all those 4 points that I mentioned above. And what that kind of like manifested itself into for us in terms of project is this project, the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, that took this concept of One Health, which is based on which is based on the philosophy that human, ecological, and animal health is inextricably intertwined, and we can't separate that. To figure out how we achieve that balance, this is something that people in the fields of, you know, veterinary sciences and ecological sciences have kind of like understood and have put in practice for a long time, but haven't really, you know, trickled down into construction. So how do we also like make sure like we participate in that process the same way? So, you know, landscape conservation, restoration, and regeneration is like something that we started looking at like from, you know, the offsets, look at where the buildings are going to be and how the entire campus from a master plan scale and standpoint is 100% off grid. And that takes care of the, you know, reducing our operation carbon, you know, significant in trying to meet that half as soon as possible. But more importantly, like the embodied carbon, we need a very big mind shift into what goes into our buildings and how they're built. What are the elements of the architecture and what makes it? So we are going to be able to achieve this, but not with business as usual. We need to change fundamentally how we understand the supply chains that makes our buildings. And for us, what it looks like, again, is to go back to how we used to build hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Figure out how we used to fire clay bricks, how we used to source materials for structures using wood, of course, sustainably harvested, using earth for construction and stone foundations. So minimizing as much as we can on cement and steel. Sourcing labor, of course, you know, as close to our construction site as possible. You know, rethink finishes so that, you know, we do not continue to consider that speccing materials from catalogs from, you know, factories in China and Turkey is going to cut to help us get there. But also like, you know, making sure that the trades and materials that are fundamentally not embraced in the construction industry are actually brought into this industry to help reduce some of these things.
Okay. Sorry.
Am I going over time?
Yes, and Mario, I think, is still back, and we just have, yeah, then 10 minutes, so 8 minutes for Mario, and then, yeah, sorry. It's a fascinating presentation. I could listen all day, but yeah, unfortunately.
It's all right. I just want to say this last thing about this project is that we anticipate that we're going to be carbon positive on this project in 6.05 years from now.
Okay, so we will check back on that. Thanks a lot, Christian, and sorry for cutting in. It's digitally always a bit challenging. Mario, are you on?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you. Can you share your screen?
Great. Yes, I'm doing now.
So now you have to be 8 minutes precise. Yes, and I think there's almost no time for Q&A, but we'll see. So Mario, please.
Hello to everybody, and thanks to be here. Thanks also for the presentation that was done before. I'd like to arise a few questions, few points of the work we are doing now. So as everybody knows that in the last 25 years, from Rio de Janeiro 92 up to today and in the futures, the roadmap is quite clear, the direction where we need to go. So I think in the last few years, also Europe is working quite hard to make new regulation for reducing CO2 emissions, and we have a roadmap to 150. So it's an interesting moment for architects to thinking about how we design a new generation of buildings. But the question I want to raise is we are concentrating on the last few years about the performance of the buildings, no? And how the kilowatts of buildings, no? And I think we are already a very good point to make buildings, the new buildings, very high performance. But with this diagram, with our research group, then you're discovering if the life of a building is 70 years, I say 47% of the CO2 emission is already on the construction process, and the material and the way you build, and part of only the 50% is about the performance. So the idea to using and reusing material is quite fundamental for the future. So we need to concentrate in materials, construction method, and performance. So these two things that they need to be working together. But the paradox of also this situation, then the curve of CO2 is still growing, the population is still growing, and Europe said we want to build zero energy building in 260. So this is our problem, you know, the gap between the ambition we have and the program we have. How are we going to do that? So I think all architects, I think today we listen few colleagues, they really working on this, but I want to raise you a point, you know. If we want to do building with zero energy, maybe we need to look also our past, you know, before energy, you know. How we did for many centuries, how we did building with high performance and very empathic with the climate, you know. So I want to tell you two little very quick story. One is about the Marco Polo trip. When he's arrived in Persia, the people from Persia, they offered to him ice cream. So how the people in the middle of the desert was able to make an ice cream? So they did that by making buildings. So the building is this little sketch to showing them a protecting wall against the sun and a very clever innovations to building a building so empathic with climate. They was able by in the night to make ice on the water on this pool. So that for me is the lesson from the past. We don't want to do that again, but I like the idea that if we look in the future about make completely different approach in building, maybe we need to also study a little bit our past when architects was able to find this complicity, this empathy with the climate. And another thing I like to arise as a thinking is we always, in this period of time, we always look in the future. Now, maybe the future is, we're going to find some solutions. Why we don't look around us? You know, plants and buildings have the same problem. They don't move. No? When you do a building, they don't move. Plants is the same. So the plants are in the planet for 4 million years and they adapting to the climate because they are not able to move. So they're creating conditions, no? The shape, the leaves, they look in roots, they find material. Is a very intelligent, no? So if you look in the work of Stefano Mancuso, is a scientific who's working in the intelligence of plants. So you discover it, and plants have intelligence because they know where they are. They know how to adapt themselves to climate. If I look at the building, the next side of the picture, buildings are not intelligent at all, no? Because to make a building's work, you need to put a machine, then you need to using energy. So the building is not intelligent himself. So I'm sure if we study well, we can make a different building because we make material of the building, the shape of the building, the relation with the energy which is outside to make our building intelligent without too much technology. So maybe the lesson from the past tell us a story about how we can find knowledge, because that's what we need is knowledge, not technology. We need knowledge. And maybe study what is close to us, plants. They tell us a lot about the adapting to climate. No? And I'm just quickly showing a project we did in Morocco, inspiring by cactus. You know? If we look at that picture, you know, there are so many intelligent things in this picture. Like you see the top of the cactus is white because the sun is the most hot sun in that part of the plants. So the reflection is higher. No? And the shape of the leaves is a triangular. So half of the plant is always in shade. And also the spine are not only a defense against animals, but they're catching humidity in the air and they bring the water inside the plants. So you can imagine that plants, how many thousand years was designed and adapting to extreme climate. So that's, for me, is a very interesting lesson. So maybe we need to also study a little bit more what is close to us. So this is a campus, and this is not a cactus, of course, but the oasis in the middle is where we concentrating waters and plants, and the shape of the facade is in terracotta, no? In clay. Clay can absorb humidity and release some humidity later, no? And cooling the building. So there are so many inspirations from the vegetable world, the plants around us. There may be, we need to study that more to make our building for the future, no? And that is a thermography to showing that where is hot and where is cool, no? So then showing that the plants exactly know where they are and how they survive, no? And that is the garden inside of this residential for students, no? But the last picture I want to show you is this project we are now built in Italy. Is a house, 3D printer house, but it's printed by Hertz. It's not innovation material. It's the material when we build the world in the last 1,000 years, no? So the innovation is not on the material, but it is in the tools. How we can design a building in different climate, in different latitude, and using technology to make that better than a tent or a containers, no? So that's the idea, and you make a hole in your land and put in the machine and design this building adapting to different latitude, no? So we have studied different latitude, and you have answer to different latitude, no? The building is not the same, no? So say maybe in a subtropical is one increase the ventilation of the building by creating a chimney effect. Or in the north, you want to open a big window to catch more sun you can and bring inside. So it's all a work about how to design the building. So for me, the technology innovation is about design. It's not about tools. It's tools, design, modern technology, you know, how. And I think this opens an extraordinary story between us and our past to look in the future, no? And that's the picture of that house, no? And,
okay.
And when they finish the house, it's back to the Hertz. And that's the house in printing. So no energy, using Hertz, high technology. So I think this is something that we need to think about the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much to all three of you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So there are some questions, but we promised that you will answer them in writing. So thanks a lot to Carl, Mario, and Christian. And I think that was very inspirational, and it shows how much you already do and that it can be done. So please continue what you do. Please continue to motivate your clients and the people working with you and your network and your friends and your family. And we'll hope we hear much more from you. So thanks a lot, and sorry for cutting in, but we have a limited amount of time. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you very much.